I'm Sibyl. You guys know me from working with you guys in RNegade. We did so much social media work together and I had a really great time. I am a labor and delivery nurse. I also have experience as a med-surg nurse, and during the pandemic, I kind of stumbled across a social media following completely by surprise and not intended in any way. I was never into any kind of social media anything. In fact, I think I had about 1,000 followers before I even started, and they were like my friends. And now I try to do a lot of just helping nurses feel like they are not alone in their experiences. So that's what my social media is mainly about, is helping nurses feel seen, especially Latina nurses feel seen, labor and delivery nurses feel seen. And I am continuing to do that and continuing working as a bedside nurse. I'm dabbling into other things, other businesses right now, which are kind of a surprise. But yeah, that's kind of the 10,000 foot view.
So I love that. And Sibyl, we're so excited to have you, and for a million reasons, like Kieran said at the beginning. Your experiences are vast. But I just want to start this discussion. In my experience with labor and delivery nurses, they literally hate your ACLS. I mean, BLS is something we all have to have, but when as the director of the American Heart for like a decade, for a large healthcare system, I would always introduce the course at the minute and say, okay, where do you work? Where do you work? And the L&D, the labor and delivery nurses, are like, labor and delivery. I mean, they're like, oh my gosh, I hate ACLS more than anything.
They're scared.
They're very, very, very scared. So I really appreciate your perspective, because again, especially in labor and delivery or anywhere, if we don't do those very first steps, those BLS steps, those basic life support steps, everyone's brain goes to advanced cardiac life support, and then that's an ultimate freeze right there. So let's start out on mindset. As a labor and delivery nurse, from either now or then or when, how do you feel about it? What do you think? What's your mindset?
I am lucky and unlucky in some ways to have grown up as a baby nurse in a high-risk labor and delivery unit. So I actually worked for like a top 3 hospital for 5 years. So I went from being a med-surg nurse on a liver floor that was actually like, they were very sick liver patients, and I had been very used to calling codes. We even had palliative care housed on our unit because they were that sick. And then transitioning to labor and delivery to very high risk population. So codes for me, I think, are different than for the average L&D nurse, only because I feel like I've seen more and with more frequency than maybe other people would have. I will say labor and delivery codes are extremely scary. And I know it's completely different. It's a completely different mindset and vibe going into it. Like you said, the mindset completely changes because you're taking a mostly healthy birthing parent and they're coding. So that means something terrible has happened along the way. So not only are you going into this code kind of quickly and without much preparation, but you are trying to piece together the reasons why they might be coding in the first place, which is very scary, and not like in med-surg where you kind of see a trend coming and you're like, I think maybe this patient's going to code. The uterus loses blood at over 500 cc's a minute postpartum. So that code can happen to anybody, and that's really scary. So that's why I think labor and delivery approaches codes with such hesitance, because when it happens, it's bad. It's really bad. And it involves a birthing parent or it involves a newborn. So I think that's why when people approach it from the labor and delivery standpoint, they're like deer in headlights. They're like, it's almost like bad juju to even talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sibyl, I gotta say, I honestly got goosebumps, listening, because here I am, like, envisioning myself beside you in your med-surg unit with end-stage liver, which, that patient right there, like you said, there's so many signs and symptoms. And when we talk about the signs and symptoms, which is kind of the next topic, but who cares? It's like, the 8 hours before, the 12 hours before, the 8 hours before, for sure the 3 hours before. I mean, and a liver patient's going to show signs and symptoms, but this mom baby pair, and it's a duo, and we've got 2 lives here. That is crazy scary. You gave me goosebumps. Really is an amazing perspective.
And not only is it in the labor and delivery suites, you could also be in the OR. So that's also really scary. Because the ORs are you feel a little bit, unless you have a lot of experience in your particular OR, as a travel nurse, you kind of feel like a fish out of water wherever I am. So to have a code in the OR,
Yeah,
it's terrible. So
add insult to injury.
yeah, if you have a code in the OR, I worked at a naval hospital where the OR nurses did all the C-sections. So we would get the labor and delivery nurses to come in and help, but they were, number one, terrified of the OR. They didn't know what they could touch, what they couldn't touch, right? So, getting them up on top of a pregnant mom who's bleeding out to do compressions was like kind of a hard stop a lot of time, right? And so then the OR crew had to get in there, and then you got all this stuff and, an incision and it was usually a cluster.
Yeah, I can imagine. I've circulated in my career, so we don't have like an OR team. So it would be like me, the scrub tech, and usually like a helper nurse or like a second nurse in the room. But it's very scary.
It's all kinds of different scenarios in terms of how they put the team together, right? Sometimes it's the labor and delivery nurse who becomes a circulator, even though she's not an OR nurse. So, right, like that becomes an issue right there. And then sometimes it's the OR team that takes over. So we had a patient who had, where they bled out the DC, I can't remember, DIS?
DIC.
DIC, yeah.
They were in DIC, That happens.
It was horrible.
So scary.
So scary.
Yeah.
So on that, on the back of that, whether you were in med surg and or the dreaded double duo, right, an OB-OR case, holy smokes, right? Because I have consulted with pre-op and post-op and a little bit of trauma intra, and but never OB and OR. I mean, my gosh, you guys have no idea how much now I'm focusing on this in my outside of this conversation because it's so needy. So the question is, have you ever had any practice time, any type of code practice in either environment?
Like I said, I'm lucky that I went to I worked at a top 3 hospital. So yes, I did get, as a staff nurse, a lot of practice time. I will say that I have more experience just with patients in general. The practice that we did get, I think, was mostly for the technology. So to be able to use the technology, which is never enough, right? There's always a need for being actual simulation situations. And we did get a little bit of that, but I'm sure that is an issue in most places, that people don't have this kind of training. But yeah, it's really just, I don't think personally that I knew what to do with codes or anything like that until they started training me for like the triage role, what they call the observation role or the charge nurse role. That's when you really felt like you had to be ready for these codes because you were the resource, and it was your responsibility to like almost learn, as much as you could through your experience and through your theory, like, your book. You'd have to pull out your book from when you did your certification.
So that's a really good point, because if you go back, let's go back even further upstream in our nursing education. So the amount of time we spent in cardiology in our nursing education is like a chapter.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it literally is like a chapter. And then you get, you had to have basic life support to be in nursing school. And then when we leave nursing school, they usually even want you to be a nurse for a year or some length of time, year to 3 years, before you get advanced cardiac life support, which I call on as well, because how silly is that? I mean, my first patient on my very first day as a new nurse was a cardiac arrest. So, but still, again, I think one of the big barriers from what we learn in the classroom and into what happens at the bedside is that worry about advanced cardiac life support. We're worrying about the cardiac rhythms. Do I know the cardiac rhythms? I only had like a few strips in my book and now I'm supposed to run this code. So we basically, hold back or hesitate. So again, the focus of my big soapbox when it comes to this is if we drill again and again and again, just the first 2 to 6 minutes, we can then confidently go to advanced cardiac life support. But I often say that by then the bird's on the bottom of the cage, if you know what I mean. I mean, like if we don't do what we need to do between now and then we can give enough epi for this table to have a pulse. But we're trying to do compressions electricity, which is the next topic, and we're moving right along. So we'll head right into it. So the bottom line is it's the using of the defibrillator, right? So if the national average, you're supposed to start compressions in 1 minute. That's generally not a problem. Someone's mashing on something. Yeah. Hopefully, kind of, sort of. I mean, that usually happens.
Quality is questionable, but someone's trying to do it.
and there's 15 nurses, but the respiratory therapist is usually on the chest and maybe on the airway. But it's okay. Like someone's doing it. We're all like, okay, we go good, thank you. But the electricity, right? So then the crash cart arrives, and then you're supposed to be shocking within 2 minutes. Within 2 minutes. I said this in probably every one of our interviews, but the national average across our country is 4.3 to 4.5 minutes for rapid response teams to arrive on scene.
I believe that.
So what's happening in those first few minutes? What are you seeing? What have you seen?
So for codes that I've been in, definitely getting the crash cart and getting pads on. That's been my number one, priority aside from chest compressions. We rely heavily on not just respiratory, because we don't have a lot of respiratory in the labor and delivery, but we rely on anesthesia. So whoever the anesthesia provider is, we rely on them to kind of lead the code. I don't know that that's the norm in every labor and delivery, but usually they are the most experienced in these things. So pads and then running the ZOL. I think the big problem with codes in labor and delivery is that if someone is having a postpartum hemorrhage and they're coding, if you don't stop the bleed somehow, it doesn't matter if you bring them back, they're going to continue to code, right? So there's also that piece. So we rely again on the OBs as well to be kind of thinking about that piece. And in the beginning, for the nurses that I've worked with, definitely compressions are a priority, and getting those pads on and getting that, I was gonna say soul, but getting that machine to read the rhythm and see what we can do, and then go to the next steps.
I mean, I think Susan, it's fascinating to listen to Sibyl, because we've talked to 5 other nurses and she's the only one that's like, we get right to compressions and we get those pads on, right? Like, Sibyl, do you think that comes from that sort of double duo thing where it's like you got a mom and a baby, and so you're even more like kind of in a hypervigilant alert state where you're, I got to know this? Or do you think or is it the center that you worked at? I mean, we haven't talked about it.
Or are you just a baller? And everyone
not me personally. Like, I'm talking about the team in general, because I think that the stakes seem, I'm not saying they are higher, but they seem to be at the time. Like, I'm not trying to like put down anybody else or anybody else's death, but when you're facing a family, usually the other parent's in the room. Yeah. The baby is in the warmer. The stakes are high, and you're like, oh crap! Like, we gotta, like, there's no choice for us. We get this adrenaline rush, and we're like, we gotta bring this parent back, no matter the cost.
Susan's conversationally constipated.
Yeah, but okay. So here we are saying, Sibyl, you guys are rock stars. But you know what they did? They recognized the problem. They called for help. They began compressions with the pads on. They're using electricity. They just did what they're supposed to do. So she's just the first one who's like, yeah, we do the basic life support. And we're like, oh. Oh, and you did it in the worst environment. Oh,
Well,
I'm praising her, but isn't that the answer
That's
that we're looking for?
isn't
I
it
think we're-
interesting though? I wonder if because the stakes seem just that much higher, it overrides the freeze. I wonder.
Well, I will say, usually when there is a code in labor and delivery, everybody's going in there. Like it's not. I don't feel like people are used to it in the way that maybe in the ICU you would see like codes all the time. I think in labor and delivery, they're just rare enough that although people have practice with them, the minute you hear that code bell, everyone's running. Literally everybody's running because they're like, we're not gonna risk dropping the ball or something like that, you know?
Okay,
Not
so
that the ICU does that, but you know what I'm saying? Like we are just a little bit more scared.
Yeah, but guess what? Your fear has you prepared. And so if I'm going to have a baby or be in the OR, I'm going to come wherever you are. And you can just keep in touch with me.
I wonder if across the board it's like that though. The discernment between the stakes are higher, like even if it's perception, and that or like an ICU nurse who just does them all the time, right? Like you're prepared either way between the L&D or the ICU, but the reasons are maybe a little different. And ICUs are doing them all the time, so they just know what to do. But in Sibyl's case, it's like, I gotta know what to do because I got a mom and a baby and a dad, like, right? It's interesting the difference there.
Also, I find that, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you.
I was gonna say that most of our patients are full code. So there's also no question about what needs to happen next. Versus, I remember being in palliative care and hospice, it would be like, oh, who's this patient? Like, what's going on? You hear a code blue in labor and delivery, you're not questioning what's gonna happen. You're running, you're doing compressions, you're doing everything that can be possible. Because this person's like 30 years old. You know what I mean? It's a little bit different.
Well, it goes back to mindset. We're going like backward to mindset too. And it's like, it's the quiet part out loud, you know, that none of us really want to say. But if you're working in an ICU and you've seen this person, they've been intubated for a month, maybe they don't have a DNR, you know, maybe they are full code, but there is and it's not that you don't want to do your job or you're not going to do your job, but there is a subconscious part of you that there's like this hardwired, merciful, wrong or right, it's in there. And I'm not saying it makes you go slower, but so I don't know. I think it's multifactorial. You know,
yes.
It certainly does. If you've seen somebody kind of suffering in a bed and languishing for a month, it's not that you don't do your job as quickly, but there is something nuanced about it, that there's not this, I want to say, sense of urgency. It's almost like, you know, I guess that's it, but your actions aren't different or any
I just feel like
slower.
There's no question.
Yeah, it's just
for labor and delivery, it is like it's almost like the fear takes you where you need to be, and it is a little bit, there is a little bit of a delay even in med surg, figuring out who this patient is and what their wishes are. And I think that you can have the nurse, the primary nurse, who's very aware that this patient is DNR, DNI. But when someone calls code in the ICU, everybody comes running. They don't know anything about this patient, right? Everybody, they're like, there's almost like an underlying question, especially like you said, if they've been in a bed for a while. And it's not necessarily like, they may not even know the patient, but they don't know their wishes. But in labor and delivery, like most of the time, like 99.9% of the time, patients are full code. So it takes that piece out.
Yeah, they're there to live.
No hesitance.
They're there to live. They're there to live times two. Hardcore. So I love this perspective because it's an urgency it's an urgency for life that is doesn't need to be discussed. It's just there. Where, Karen, to your point, the ICU patient, it's almost like nurse code, right? Like sometimes we're the only ones in the room that understand where this patient's going. And when and how and why. It's just kind of a matter of logistics at that, in some cases. And we as nurses have this kind of knowing of how that is going to go, whether everyone in the room gets it, understands it, feels it.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
That's a whole nother plane on this. But I'll add to the ICU discussion, and then Sibyl, I'd like you to weigh in on this as well, just to kind of change the trajectory a little bit. But it's the number of new nurses in our midst, post-pandemic, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, and what's happening in nursing and the floodgates and so forth. But the numbers I'm hearing from my local healthcare system here is like 80% new, whether you're ED, ICU, OB, or wherever you are. I mean, we have like 80% new nurses 2 years or less. So now we bring in that factor. Yeah, well, and so now we talk about fear. And then many of those nurses were trained during the pandemic, and their level of clinical time was zero, next to none. So now they're coming into a patient care environment. They're 2 years or less. They're in the ED, ICU. They're everywhere, and we thank God for them, right? We have to, but think of them beside you in that same scenario. These are crazy times.
They are.
And one of the things they're quoting, of course, and even some of the thought leaders like yourself on TikTok and on any social media, it's we are in a crisis for a million reasons, and I don't want to get off topic, but it relates to my topic because patients are going to die because we're not prepared, because we don't have additional training, and we're being trained. Nurses 2 years or less are being trained in a code situation by nurses who are at year 3 and have seen 2 codes in their life, maybe none. I did a study for my doctorate, you guys, in 2020 during the early pandemic, and 86%, it was like 54% had never seen a code, 64% had never done compressions, and 84% had never touched their emergency equipment. This was a medical surgical unit.
Wow.
That's crazy.
And those are true numbers.
Those are crazy numbers.
Those are crazy numbers.
Do not tell civilians that, because they will fall out of their chairs.
What? Andra, to Karen's point,
they should know so that they care.
Yes, and Sibyl, that we can talk about that for a second, because Karen's point is, I mean, here I am. When I came out of that research study, I asked somebody to help me with the white paper. And it was like it's a 140-page document. And, what comes back was this: can you believe, what would the community think? Healthcare people don't know how to save lives. And I was like, what are you, jerk? That's not what we're trying to say. I'm trying to say we need more training. But if you look at it through the other lens, it says we aren't trained and you can't save our lives. So Karen, in one of our podcasts, she's like, hello, like, how's it going to change if we don't tell people that we're not prepared?
It's also a double-edged sword, because you have to, I believe the public has to know. Part of what I do on TikTok is letting people know about things that they otherwise wouldn't know about, healthcare-wise or nursing-wise. But there's always that group of people who will hold us to a standard that is not only unreachable these days, but offer no help or guidance when it comes to meeting that standard, or offer no support and just be mad at healthcare workers for it and blame us for it. And we've seen, many instances where healthcare workers have been blamed, right? So I do see that side, and it kind of, I think it's demoralizing as a nurse community to express concerns and be like, hey, you should know about this. You should want, like, for example, safe patient ratios, right? Like, you should want safe patient ratios.
You should know you can demand them. Right,
you should want that. But then they turn around, and people will say the nurses are not working hard enough, or that, they'll get stuck on like, oh, but travel nurses make so much money. I'm like, okay, what does that have to do with safe patient ratios? Like, even though, like, because I feel like there is a level of spite towards healthcare workers sometimes, and that's hard. That's hard to navigate.
So Sibyl, I'm gonna call bullscuddy, not on you, but on that narrative. Because again, this is why we're here. That's why you're on TikTok. That's why the RNegade bandits and I have come together on this, and just we're saying I'm calling bullshit on all of it. I'm done. What I'm saying, what you're saying, what we're saying is true. And safe staffing ratio, safe patient staffing ratios, it's just ridiculous. The fact that we know what my program is 2 to 6 minutes. Honestly, there's a 1 hour course. There's 10-minute modules. Then it's one and done. Then it's hands-on brief repetitive practice, which, by the way, the resuscitation giants in the world say, here's our $1 million program we want you to buy. An online program in your home, and then an online program on the computer. And that's going to prepare you for the day you need to be in a room with your hands on the chest of a patient. And then in small print, they say, and by the way, what you should really do is do brief hands-on repetitive practice with your team, with your equipment in your space. Figure that out. Well, that's what my business is. It's brief, repetitive, hands-on practice with your team in your space. So,
which is amazing.
I'm just saying, yeah. I mean, so, but you know what? We're not prepared. But I can't blame us. We've been through our education. We take our every 2 years. We look to our leaders and everybody else and say, what do we need to be compliant on this? And they say once every 2 years in a land far, far away with equipment you don't use and not your team is perfect.
Yeah.
Right. So we're just I'm calling it.
Also, when there's a new nurse every other week, every 2 years is going to cover this many people.
It's so interesting because from a military standpoint, you know, they don't mess around with that stuff. Like everybody, you're the secretary or the receptionist or you're getting code drills, you're getting practice. I mean, I went through so many codes in the military. I can't even count them. It was ridiculous. It was good. I felt very, very competent while I was in the military that I knew what to do. But it's because we got so much practice all the time. And in the civilian world, I mean, aside from staffing ratios and all the other issues, like bottom line is we should know how to do BLS, basic life support, all of us.
All right, so let's, because we spent a lot of time on, I feel like we're complaining now. So like, no, that's what we do. We're not complaining. We're talking about how unprepared we are and less about the solution, which is code prep, which is Susan's thing. So Susan, why don't you move us forward to the next thing? But that's why we're here. It's talking about we need more preparation, and here's a solution, and also the solution to what is the lack of preparation? What does it look like in other areas? So you're just you're just highlighting the need in a different way.
Brilliant, my maestro pal. So, we did discuss, I'm going to just wrap up the emergency equipment issue. So we learned that we don't have enough time with it. We need more training, but there is a genuine fear of a defibrillator, period. Whether it's in automatic mode, whether it's in AED mode, turning it on and you hear that sound, as soon as there's a sound, it's over, right? No sounds out of that thing. Game over. So we'll move past that because it's clear we need more time on the defibrillator. And I'm going to just say once a year in competencies where we do our Easter egg hunt, what's in the drawers. I'm just saying, I don't think that's cool. I think it's cool. Everyone who knows where the OG is. What drawer? Where are fluids? What drawer? Oh, but that will help. You know, when someone's dying, that will help. Anyway, moving on. The next step is rescuer 1, 2, and 3. Who are rescuer 1, 2, and 3, and what are their duties? So in many hospitals, they have code roles.
Yep.
If you worked in hospitals, they have code roles. So I've got the runner, I'm rescuer 1, I'm lead, whatever, recorder, all the normal. So, and there's a lot of research that show how well those roles work. Primarily, the research proves that it attempts to keep the number of respondents down, right? So that millions of people, like you described, if it's a code in the OR, like boom, everyone's coming. And that happens on the floor too. it's like too many cooks in the kitchen. Quite often we can't hear, it just adds to the chaos. Who's actually looking at which monitor? Are we using the monitor here? Who cares? So who are rest group 1, 2, and 3? According to me, rest group 1 is if you find the person, you're up. You're number 1. Rest group 2, you're the closest person to rest group 1. You hear, job description, be damned. You hear, you're that close. Boom, you're there. Number 1 job is help number 1 with their compressions. Are they good enough? You become the CPR coach. This is a role that came out in 2020 by the American Heart Association. Dr. Susan Davis came up with it earlier than that. We're not going to say that here, but we will anyway, years before. So your job is to make sure those compressions are jammed up good, because quite often it's over the rail, there's pillows in the way, and we're doing what we think we're doing good, but honestly, bad compressions are almost the same as none, truly. So that's Rescue 2's job. And if the compressions are jammed up and on fire, fine. Then they room prep, meaning get all the junk out of the way, bed down, away from it. There's a million things they can do. 3 is the closest one to the crash cart, whomever that is. Again, job description be darned, and down it comes. And then together they put on the pads, backboard, back pads. So it's the basic life support. Those 3 roles come before code roles. So the entire premise behind my program is basic, recognize the problem, call for help, begin compressions, use electricity. And that's done by rest group 1, 2, and 3, regardless of code roles. What say you, Sibyl? What do those 3 roles mean to you? Does it sound like something you see? Does it sound like something you would agree should be drilled?
Oh, for sure. I agree that it should be better defined, like you are right now defining it to people, because I think that's where, and pardon my French, everything goes to shit. When you have
French class.
Yeah, look at that. Because you were very impressed when I said that we would get there and put on the pads, and like one person would be doing the compressions, which is great, but that's where everything falls apart if you don't have clear roles. Not the roles that they're talking about, which is like documenter. I feel like that's almost like secondary to those like immediate needs. So yeah, I totally think that is incredible to define and to like drill into people's heads that like if you found the patient. Also, it kind of helps keep people on track, because I have gone to codes where you arrive and the primary nurse is somewhere. She ran away. So then you're not trying to lead, but trying to like have this code happen. Especially I remember I was charge nurse of that particular time, and I was like, I don't know, like I know the basics of this patient, but like not very much, So it's good. It's definitely good.
Yeah, well, and thank you, because the answer is I'm challenged when I come into new environments, especially like you worked in those top 3 type of environments where they have a lot of training. You have students. There's lots going on in an environment like that. But generally, those type of environments are very hung on their code roles. And I'm gonna say it, and I love the code rules. But when I'm asked, they're like, well, we already have a program. And I said, well, listen, mine comes before your program. Like they say, well, who's rest group 1, 2, and 3? I said, everybody.
Yeah,
it can be anyone.
We're waiting for her. She's in the bathroom.
Everybody. Everybody is 1, 2, and 3. If you have a basic life support card, you are rest group 1, 2, and 3. And frankly, I didn't get on my crazy horse about pushing the analyze function on the defibrillator, but truly that's a basic life support skill. And in hospital, there's policies on who will, or maybe the policy doesn't even exist. But that's one of my first questions when I asked about their adult cardiac arrest policy. Do you have it? Can they push the analyze function? Well, that's the standard of care. Who can push the button in the airport or in the mall with an AED?
Anyone.
Yeah, the nurses are supposed to recognize the problem, call for help, get the pads on, and
wait.
I think that issue is really good to address because it involves providers. So I think when a code happens, depending on which provider you have, you can have a provider who wants to do everything manually as well. And that is particularly difficult because not only does he or she have to communicate that they want to do like, they want to basically lead the code step by step, which is possible, like, and can be done, but it lengthens the code, and it makes it more of a cluster because you are not following a standardized, you're just kind of waiting to hear the next set of instructions instead of going instinctively and like pressing that analyze button,
Yes. And Sibyl, I even teach, especially because providers, no offense providers, because we love you, we need you,
yes,
but
for sure.
They're generally the worst, honestly, when it comes to all of the above. I mean, their hearts are in the right place, but they too don't practice very often. So the nurses are generally running the code. So I actually teach no harm, no foul, just push the button, push the analyze function. And if there's a physician in there or provider that's like, you're again, 1,000, 2, 1,000, like, okay, oops, clear. Because, it knows you don't have to be a rhythms expert. The machines know. And to me, that's one of the biggest hangups in nursing. They're scared to death that they're going to get that rhythm wrong, or they don't know what the rhythm is, so they're not going to mess with it. But you don't have to know. Just push the button. So respiratory 1, 2, and 3. Listen. So let's paint the whole picture as we wrapped it up. We kind of started about your mindset. I think as a community, we have to understand our mindset about CodeBlue. And in general, people love it or hate it, and most of us hate it. And those who hate it, they then end up fearing it. And that is a deadly fear, if you will, because they take that fear home with them. Good code, bad code. Did I do enough? Did I not do enough? Should I know more? I shouldn't know more. Maybe it's a 40-year career nurse, but it's been in 1 or 2. She's avoided them every step of the way. So she's just as fearful because she's embarrassed that she's not done it and doesn't think that she can. So that's the upstream. Then we have the deterioration piece. I'm over the computers and how much we have time. We have to, the deterioration scores, early warning systems are only as good as the timely information we input in them. So we created a cross-room assessment, green, yellow, red, something we're talking about. Who's sick, who's not sick. Then there's the equipment. We're not handling it enough. Analyze function, honestly, on the front of every defibrillator, regardless of brand, it literally has step 1, turn it on. Step 2, analyze. Step 3, push the damn glowing red button if it tells you to do so. Clear first, ideally. And then respiratory 1, 2, and 3. Who's up? So if we do those steps, which by the way, take about 1.5 to 2 minutes when you put it together, this is all I'm asking for, is 2 minutes. When that happens, critical care arrives, compressions are in place, pads are on, they've probably shocked once or twice before they've gotten there. There's time for a quick S-bar. Where is that nurse? And who cares who it is? Because I just like, what's going on? Are they a code? Are they a full code? Are they a full code? What's going on? I mean, we do have to throw it in there sidebar every now and again.
That is.
But they're literally the show should be going. And then on the next round, every 2 minutes, right? On the next round, critical care can take over, and off we go. I mean, isn't that something just sounds soothing to you? Like, it sounds soothing to me.
I think just developing that instinct, this course helps with. Which developing that instinct is what takes years to happen. So why not like hasten it a little bit? Like, hey, this is what your instinct should tell you to do. 1, 2, 3.
And it's the same guy that's at the crosswalk that tells you to wait. I mean, on the Zols, wait. It's the same guy that's in the analyze function. Like, if you listen to him to tell you when to cross the street, you can certainly listen to him tell you to shock somebody. Analyzing. Shock. And it's the same guy. Wait.
And I just thought I'd point that out. And a big part of the hesitance is that people just don't know. Like I said, people don't know what the first thing to do is, right? They don't know, like, how do I even start this? And I think that we focus so much on epi, like, dosages and like reading this and that and like the rhythms and stuff that like, it's very overwhelming when you stumble upon a code. You're like, I have to remember all that I took a year and a half ago, for this situation right now, if I would have known as a new grad, no, you actually only have to remember this, this, and that right now. The rest will come, or people will help you. That would have been helpful for me.
Yeah. Well said.
Well
being
said.
scared.
No, that is, you just finished this off perfectly. Like, if that's the message, 4 things: check for responsiveness, call for help, start compressions, use electricity. Like, that's it. All that epi, ACLS, mumbo jumbo, let somebody else do that, or somebody's used to it. Yeah. Perfect.
Well, the thing is, it is important, but it comes after.
Yeah.
So you just like right now, I just need to focus on this.
Wait.
Yeah. On the guy from the crosswalk.
Yeah.
You know, Sibyl, to that point, you know, I look at adult codeblue policies in hospitals all over the place, and when you read their policy, almost every policy begins with the ACLS. And then I have to point out, and I'm saying, yeah, they do, because they want to make sure that this nurse does this, and then there's and it goes right to the drugs and the algorithms. I'm like, okay, sir, how about we just make sure that we just add this language and train this language? So what we're talking about here, and what you just wrapped up so brilliantly, is it really takes a community. It takes an environment to save a life. It takes us all thinking that. So I call it sometimes I call it all kinds of things, but it's a basic life support rapid response team, which is everybody other than the critical care team. We are the basic life support rapid response team. We're there, and this is our duty. In fact, it is our duty to respond and do those first few things, and do them like soldiers, automatically and beautifully. And frankly, all the research in the whole wide world proves that those are the only things that actually save the life.
But I'm really curious about the idea of, like, because if it's those 4 things, why are we not really prepping and teaching our nursing students? Sorry, like, why are we not getting?
Well, that's why we're
them
here.
Like right away, they already know. And to Sibyl's point, gosh, like, what a relief. If I just knew those 4 things, I could totally do this. I mean, that's like brilliant, right? Like, it makes it so simple. It's right back to the artistry and common sense, people.
Yeah. If only we could find somebody who has a program to really drive those basic 4 things home.
I honestly think that with nursing school, to answer your questions, I think nursing school loves complexity.
Get out.
Loves complexity. Like they love taking a simple concept and creating like so much hardship around it.
Yeah, it's check for responsiveness, develop a care plan, start compressions.
Yeah, it's like make sure you documented education while you're documenting a code. You know, like I mean, that's an exaggeration, but I think that's where the disconnect is, because I think we forget the very basics, which happens in a lot of disciplines actually, where you forget the very, very basic stuff.
High risk for dying.
Yeah, and then you are stuck with all this knowledge of the more complicated things.
Yeah.
This is a kind of sense that I get when I talk to nursing students, or just like, especially when they're answering questions for the NCLEX, they're like, well, what about this? And I'm just like, you're thinking complex, because that's what they made you study. They made you study like every nerve in the brain. But this question's about falls.
Yeah, it's not.
Like it's like so simple, but it's true. That's why we end up.
It's not the NCLEX, it's the NComplex.
Like, you know all the cranial nerves, and you can recite them to me, and that's great. But this question is about falls, and then you forgot to put the bed alarm on the patient, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, that's right." You know, it's kind of like that phenomenon.
Well, and to wrap this up totally, you just that's what happens everywhere. So it starts in nursing school, and then it only progresses once you get into your clinical setting, because every healthcare profession, we're trained to think of the worst, the highest, the worst, the most complex, and we do, and that's where our brain goes. When in all actuality, I think the best patient care, the best relationships, everything is built on our core basics, which are, if we again, my core statement is we cannot continue to teach and preach advanced measures when we have not mastered the basics. So,
Yeah.
Amen.
Sybil, you're the bomb. Triple.com. Thank you for your perspective.
Yeah, well, tell everybody where they can go watch your fabulousness on TikTok. How do they find you places?
So I'm on Instagram, TikTok, and now recently YouTube. Just YouTube Shorts for now. And I am nurse.sibyl, Sibyl, on all of those. So you can find
Go
me.
follow her.
Yeah, fantastic. They're hilarious. I mean, this hour-long conversation, or just short, did not. I think people will go on there and see some of your TikToks and be, that was the same girl. I mean, she's got some depth. Let's just say that.
It's also funny.
I keep it very
that's
casual on TikTok.
Yeah, but it's creative. It's hilarious. Very entertaining. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Sibyl. This was a wonderful and rich addition to this series.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.